Hello everyone, this is David from the Smack Studio team, and today we'll have a comprehensive look at the character editor in Smack Studio. This tutorial is going to be a bit on the longer side, so if you want something more succinct, you can check out our shorter tutorials also. A quick overview of the layout is the top left will have some global settings for the character, animations will appear in this section, down left is where you test the character, down right is where you can import and export sprites for the character. The top right will be the character's rig, projectiles, and other properties which we'll cover later on. And on the top right we have some action buttons, like the undo and redo buttons, creating a new character, opening an existing character, saving, finalizing, and getting back to the main menu. When you open the character editor for the first time, you'll be presented with this screen. You can create a character from scratch, you can create a character based off of a template, or open an existing one. For our purposes, we're going to be opening an existing character, which is going to be Granite. Alright, now here's Granite. As you can see up here, we have several timelines, and it's going to default when you open a character to their idle animation. So under animations on the left here, you'll see a populated list, and under basic movement, the first item is idle. This is their idle animation. This blue box you see over the character is their hurtbox, and you can see that here on a timeline right here. And if I hit this eyeball button, it'll actually hide that layer. And the same thing is true for the rig itself. You can hide the rig, and we'll show you why that's useful later on. So here's the kind of basic timeline on the top, and depending on what you have open, you might see additional timelines. So let's find one that has a lot of timelines, like let's say, I think forward air has a pretty big one. Yep. So here we have like we saw earlier, we have a hurtboxes timeline, so this blue square that decides where he gets hurt, this character. We have an animation rig layer, but notice that it's hidden. So there's another layer here called sprites, and if we hide that, he'll be invisible, and there's actually a layer underneath it that's actually the rig. So we'll go over that in a second. And then for hitboxes, this determines what part of the character hurts the other player. And all these things can be edited. On the top here we have actions, which we'll go over also. So that gives you an idea of timelines. You can actually make as many timelines as you'd like, with the exception of the animation rig. Right now you can only make one of those, but as many actions as you need. There's also a comments area too. So you can add comments in actions, which is really helpful if you're trying to remember what does what in your character. So before we get into the real meat and potatoes of this, I think it'd be good to kind of show off how test play works. If you're using a keyboard and mouse, you can just hit test play and start moving with whatever controls you have set up. But if you have a controller, you can click this controller icon, press A so that it detects the correct one, and then you can begin a test play session. So here is Granite. He is unmodified, and you can move around and test the movement out. And you have an opponent, that stationary opponent you can test moves on and hits done and all that. And we're going to be adding more to this down the road, but for now, it serves its purpose. So that's what it looks like. Just click this exit test play to get back to the editor. And I think the next thing that we'll go into is the rig itself, because if you want to make your own character, chances are you're going to want to mess with the animation rig. So to make this a bit simpler, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open a version of Granite that has no sprite layers at all. So, I'll explain why that's useful in a little bit, but just know that this version of Granite that I'm about to open, called Granite Demo, is going to be a modified version of Granite. Okay, so this is the same character, except he has no sprite layers enabled on his attacks. Okay, so with that understanding, we're actually going to go up to the character rig up here. We're going to click down this drop-down menu and then click here. And here we are presented with the animation rig settings. And on the left, we'll go through these options. We're going to start on the sprites, the edit sprites section, and I'm going to go in and make some edits to Granite's face. We're going to use the built-in drawing features, and let's see. I'm gonna make his eyes red. Actually, I'll make his eyes purple. I'll make things a little different here. So I can go in, change his eyes. Maybe I'll do a slightly lighter shade for these parts of his eyes. Now he has red eyes. But not only that, I'm going to give him some spectacles too. Alright, so now he's going to have much larger eyes. And this should be very visually distinct. So all I did was draw on this single sprite piece. I'm going to click accept. And what you can see is the actual in-game model has those new eyes that we gave him by just drawing. And every frame of animation it's already applied. So we'll do another test play. I don't need to press A again because I didn't change my controller. And look at this. We have the old granite on the left here and the new one on the right. And all these attacks have been animated automatically. So that can happen pretty instantly. What's really cool about that too is, let's say, you know, if you wanted to make an edit to your character, well, you can do that one tiny edit and it applies across every animation. And from there, you can actually export those animations and use them in external programs like Sprite or, you know, whatever, Photoshop, whatever tool you happen to use. And these are all the sprites that make up this animation. So it's really powerful what you can do with that. We'll probably cover that in a separate tutorial down the road, but I just wanted to throw that out there that that's possible. So now that we've made our little edit to the sprite, let's add some bones. So every sprite part is attached to a bone. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add 2 new bones to his head. I'm going to click this add button up here. You can also hit the number 4 on your keyboard. And I'm going to give him 2 ears. Now, I want to make sure that they are children bones of the head bone. I can call this something like ear right and ear left. Cool. So I don't have anything, like, they're bones, but there's no sprites on those bones yet. So, in fact, one thing, before I created the bone, I probably should have drawn the sprites first, because it's helpful to start with sprites and then apply the bones later. So I'm going to do ear L and ear R. Okay, ear L. These are not going to be sophisticated ears. They are going to be very, very basic. Okay, so here is his left ear, obviously. And you also want to note that there's 2 sides to these sprites. So if I click back, there's an opportunity to draw a back part of it also. So I'm going to fill this in with black, and then I'm going to hit back, and then there's an icon up here that says Show Reverse Side Outline. And what that's going to do is it's essentially going to guide me on where I can draw that so that it matches up perfectly with the front. So it's basically a one-to-one match. But we have a little shortcut here. We could use this copy front image to back, and it does all the work for us, which is really handy. So now that's all finished. I'm going to draw the right ear now. And let's see, I'm going to look at my bone structure here. Then I'll probably draw this something like that. Again, we're not going for sophistication here, just for demonstration. So I fill that in. I'm going to go back. I'm going to make sure this is checked, then click Fill Front Image to Back, and that has already finished. So we now have 2 ears. Now what I have to do is I'm actually going to move the bone a little bit to match a little more with the sprites that I made. And then I'm going to bind these bones. So I'm going to go to Bind Bones. Everything's already bound except for our two new bones. So I'll pick ear L, and I'll match it up with the bone that I want, which is ear L on this list, and click Bind. And on ear R, I'll do the same thing. Okay, there we go. So now what you can do in 3D settings, it's generated a 3D object, for lack of a better word, based on the sprites that I just drew. And what you can see is there's also 3D been applied to these other items, too, of granite. So here's the preview of our character. And you can see you can actually move and rotate just like it's part of granite. So we're going to click accept and see what happens. Okay, so we have ourselves some granite ears. And one thing I want to bring up earlier than I did the first time I made this tutorial is you'll want to utilize the save feature very often. You never know when something might stop working. So saving is a good idea to do regularly. When you click save, it'll freeze a bit, and then after that, it will save your character. So we're going to mess around with these ears a little bit because I want to take this time to show some of the properties you have in the animation. Since they're bound to the head bone, they're going to be moving already with the head. So they actually kind of look pretty good as it is. But I think they could look a little bit better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this bone, and make sure I'm on the animation rig timeline, which I am. And what you can see here is there's a bunch of little options here where you can scale it, you can move it, spin it, and there are little buttons here to change what kind of transformation you're doing. So let's say, for example, I want his ear to bend down in the beginning. If I'm on R rotation mode, all I have to do is click and drag this, and it'll rotate in a 2D space. If I hit T, it rotates in a 3D space. And that's when changing the camera is helpful, because what you can actually do with Smack Studio is rotate things in 3D. It's pretty insane. So we have done that. What I'm going to do next is actually change the depth offset. And if you just want to change what layer the sprites appear on and not actually change their 3D space placement, you can use the depth offset option. After we've gotten that settled, I'm actually going to do the same thing for this ear too. I'm going to click this and change the depth offset so it becomes in front. So it's very obvious. Alright, so I'm only changing this on one of the animation frames, so it's going to go back into his head a little bit, but that's okay. We're not going to worry about that. That was just for demonstration purposes. So let's say you get really stuck, though, if you're making your own character, you've deleted a bunch of bones or what have you, and you want it to look exactly like this, right? You might be really happy with how things are lined up here, but you'll go to your timeline and it might look completely different. What you can do is you can select a frame on this animation rig timeline, and then there's an apply bind pose button. If I click that, it's going to apply the exact same pose that you have in this view onto this, and that can make things a lot easier if you want to, animate from this or just, use this as a reference. You can easily just kind of port it over from there. You can adjust depth offset from there and all that. So there you have it. There's kind of an overview of how the character rig works. There's a lot more to it, obviously, but I want to kind of keep moving so that this tutorial's not too long. All right, so anyway, I've added these ears to this custom granite character. Let's see how it looks in game. Okay, look at that. We have ourselves some ears on granite with very little effort, and it affects every animation, and it moves along with his head, and it looks pretty natural, all things considered. Now, if I want to go in and make little edits, I can do that. I can rotate them, and you can see there's a little bit of ear movement here. It's not cleaned up at all, but that gives you an idea. You can actually, from there, make additional tweaks and edits. If I want to move the ear back and front and then rotate a little more that way, you now have this little movement there that wasn't there before. So you can play around with that and get it just right. And this is a lot simpler than the normal frame-by-frame animation required by pixel art. One thing I touched on that I want to revisit is this notion of rotating this in 3D space. So obviously this is a 2D sprite, but you have a bunch of tools available to you. So let's say I want to change his up A right now. What does it look like? If I click play, it kind of does a preview of the animation. I'm turning off hurtboxes and hitboxes just for simplicity here. And I'm going to change this. I'm gonna have him spin around while he does it. So to do that, I'm going to greatly simplify this animation. I'm going to delete these keyframes, so it's going to look a lot more odd. And he's going to hit his fist in the air and spin around. So here, I'm going to click his root bone, which is right here. Just kidding, it's right here. Make sure you have the right bone selected. And then I'm going to use the spin tool to rotate him in 3D space. And then I'm going to switch to the 2D rotation tool. I'm going to move his arm slightly there. Then I'm going to pick, and what you're going to see is he actually starts to turn, but I want him to do a complete spin, right? So I'm going to pick a time later into the timeline, select root, go back to spin by pressing Y, and do this. And what should happen is, yeah, he is spinning. He's not spinning quite the way that I want him to spin. So I think I'll increase the direction a little more that way. There we go. That's the kind of spin that I wanted. And this, again, this is a spin in 3D space, pretty much. So it's pretty amazing that it can generate this. I remember seeing this at PAX West and my mind being blown. So that's an animation that I made in very little effort. And again, if I want to export these sprites, I can do that. Here's the animation that I made and all the sprites rendered. This renders at about 40 frames per second. The game runs at 60 FPS, but for each frame is about 1/40th of a second. And you can see our modified ears, our modified eyes, and our brand new animation have all been turned into sprites. So just for fun, let's see what that looks like in game. Kind of what you'd expect. Not super polished, because I didn't really take much time in polishing it, but yeah, it works. Pretty neat. Let's say you had some of your own sprite work and you wanted to actually replace part of your character. What you can do is, if you go back to the sprite list in the animation rig settings, you can find the item that you want to replace. So let's say that we want to replace the right arm here. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to replace the right arm of this granite here with Cora's right part. Cora's another character in Smack Studio. And I'm going to find this right arm, which looks like it's here. I'm going to click and drag, left click and drag, and I can right click to immediately import it, or I can click this. And here we have our arm. Now these are very different sizes. So who knows how it'll look, but we'll give it a shot. I'm going to click the back side, and I'm going to click copy front image to back. Notice this big red icon here. That's because we have this show reverse side outline checked. So I'm actually going to turn that off for a second and then really line this up. Let's do that. That looks pretty good. And I'm going to turn it on to see that it's completely mismatched. Click the back, and then click copy front image to back. And now we have a nice seamless arm that's perfectly happy on both sides. So I've done that. And there it is. Without re-rigging or binding or anything, let's see how it looks. Yeah, it looks a little wonky. But, I mean, hey, it works. If I were to re-rig it, though, let's see how it changes. So I'm going to go to this list of bones to bind. I'm going to find the right arm, which is going to highlight when I click the right one, which is this one. I'm going to unbind it, and then I'm going to rebind it by clicking the bone here. And you can see it doesn't really quite line up. So to really do this properly, we'd actually edit the bones themselves. So I'm going to try that. Now it's going to move things around in ways that I might not like, so we're going to address that. We're going to move this here. We're going to rotate this to kind of match the arm best we can. We're going to move this, and it's not going to be perfect, but it might be a lot closer. So if I click right arm, I look for right arm on this list, or I can click directly and hit bind. Let's see what that looks like. Now that looks a lot closer. The animations are going to be a little odd because they weren't animated with that arm in mind, but now you can see that it's connected. So let's try it in game. All right, so yeah, you can see the angle's a little different of the arm because I basically moved the shoulder bone. But when it comes to the animations, they work, and it looks mostly complete, which is pretty amazing. So you can really take any sprite work that you work on and import it, and it should work like that. Something else I want to mention is that not only can you draw and import sprites directly within the animation character rig, but you can actually do it directly on the timeline also. So to demonstrate that, I'm going to make sure that I'm on the idle animation for granite. I'm going to create a new sprite layer, and then I'm going to start drawing. So I've clicked the first frame, and I'm going to click paint, and oops, I actually accidentally made a little mark there. I'm actually going to draw my own flame. And it's going to be a little on the crude side, but that's okay. We're just demonstrating here. All right, there's the fire that I've just drawn on the timeline. Now there it is. It's not really doing very much, but you can animate this also. So if I move it on this point in the timeline, it will actually move in place, which is pretty cool. I can kind of have it copy this frame, add it later, and it'll create some kind of subtle movement. And if I want to, I can actually turn this sprite layer into an effects layer. And to do that, I just have to check this box, and all of a sudden I can add glowing effects, I can increase or decrease its opacity, I can change its scale and size, so if I want to move it, I can do that. And that can interpolate between keyframes too. So if I go from this keyframe to this one, it can shrink back to its size and go back to how it was before. So that's pretty neat. So for this sake, I'll just paste over all these keyframes. And what you're seeing now is a glowing, fiery effect. And again, this is nothing fancy, but it's pretty easy to create some pretty cool effects in game. So let's check that out in game really fast. there it is. There's the glowing fire effect. All right, so pretty neat that that works, but if you'd rather import something a little bit more polished and professional, let's say you've done some sprite work that's ready to go, I'm actually going to create a new sprite layer and then import an existing sprite. So we're going to, again, utilize our Cora sprite parts here, and let's just, for whatever reason, say that we want a torso to be held by granite. For whatever reason, I'm going to hide the old sprite layer, and I'm going to move this here. And there it is. Importing sprites like this can be useful for adding onto an existing animation. So if you're just trying to add some polish, you can do that. If you want to make the sprite disappear, you can right click and select new empty keyframe, which will make it invisible. So there it is appearing, and now it's gone. So you can have it just appear very briefly if you'd like. I'm thinking something like, so for example, like a light bulb appearing over the head just for an instant. You could use it like that. There's a lot of applications you could do. But when it comes to sprites, one of my favorite things to do is to bake an animation rig and utilize those sprites. So if you click bake, it's going to create an entirely new layer of sprites. And what you can do is you can actually completely hide the animation rig, because what you've done is you've generated sprite versions of your animations, which is really cool. So now what I can do is I can go into one of these individual rendered sprites and I can edit it. So maybe whatever reason, I'll make this arm gold. Okay, so now it's gold on that layer. Now, of course, I would have to make it on... This is what normal 2D animation's like. I have to make it on every single frame that same gold color. But if for whatever reason I wanted to really polish up the sprites frame by frame, I can do that. And we actually have some artists that do that for our characters. So there's an example of some utility with this bake-in feature. I'm going to take this time to hit the save icon and save our progress so far, which is a good habit that you should use. And we're going to talk about hitboxes and hurtboxes next. So I'm actually going to make these visible again. If you want to edit these, let's say that you want to change the shape of this character's hurtbox. All you have to do is select the right layer, which in this case I've selected the hurtbox layer, and then click this blue square that comes up. You can adjust the size and the position. You can click and drag. You can change its width and height. And then there's a custom property here called don't register hit to player. And this is nice for counterattack. So if I select this and somebody hits this, it can trigger another event, or and granted, wouldn't get any damage if this particular hitbox was there. Now you can create multiple hitboxes if you'd like. So if you wanted to create another one, you can use this drop down under hitboxes and create and click new. So I'm going to do that right here. And that's going to create another hitbox. And that's different from this one, right? So I can give it different properties. Let's say, for example, I wanted the first, 7 or so frames to not register the hit to player, but then after that, I wanted it to register the hit to player. That's where you might make a second hitbox, right? You can also copy and paste keyframes. So if I were to copy this and paste it, it would copy the exact attributes, but I could just change this so that it did start to register hit to player. So that's kind of where copying and pasting comes in. And by the way, you can copy and paste anything. You can copy and paste animations. So let's say I wanted to, for some reason, copy and paste this frame. Just hit Control-C, Control-V to paste. You can copy and paste keyframes there. And let's say you make a huge mistake. Let's say you accidentally delete a bunch of stuff. Oh no, I deleted all my hurtboxes and I ruined my animation. You can hit undo. And this works in both directions. So you can undo and you can redo. It's very flexible and has been a godsend, I have to tell you. So that's hurtboxes. For hitboxes, there's a bit more going on, because with hitboxes, obviously you have the sound effect of when it hits the player. You have a hit effect, so a graphical effect that kind of communicates that something's been punched, I guess you could say in this case. And then you can basically enable a bunch of conditionals. So you can say ignore shield. The hitbox itself could reflect a projectile, in the case like a reflector attack or something like that. You can have it so that it only attacks foes in certain states, so only if they're grounded or only if they're in the air. And also you can preview the sound too. So in this case, this is what it sounds like. If you'd like, you can change it to something else though, if you prefer. So let's say you want to go from medium to heavy. That's a bigger sound. But also it goes further than that. You can change the volume to make it louder or quieter. And you can change the pitch. So let's say I change the pitch to 3. That's changing the speed too and the pitch. But if I change it to like 0.5. So you can get a lot of different sounds by just playing around with the pitch there. And that can be nice if you have a bunch of multi-hit attacks that have similar punching sounds. You can just adjust the pitch and it will sound pretty awesome. So we're going to change that pitch to 0.5. And yeah, the last thing I like to cover is this section, these global settings. What you'll notice is there's a stats button. And this stats button lets you adjust the character's walk speed, the acceleration, and a bunch of other things. So I'm actually going to make some tweaks. We're going to change this to 5. We're going to make Granite just a speed machine. We're going to change his running speed to 10. We're going to make him way too fast. And we're going to reduce his ground friction. So he's going to be very difficult to control. And we're going to increase his gravity to 0.4. And he's just going to be ridiculously hard to control. We're actually going to change his max jumps from 2 to 4, because why not? And we're going to make him a little bit bigger. All right, I'm not going to change anything about his air friction. I think we've changed him enough. Once I hit accept, you can see he's already larger, and everything that we've done for him is going to automatically scale up. So let's try our changed Granite here. Okay, you can see he's enormous. Oh my word, I just fell off a platform and I lifted off like a feather. Let's see how fast I am. Oh man, I am flying fast. And I'm light as a feather. Okay, so obviously you probably wouldn't do something like that, but that gives you an idea about what you can adjust. Under events, now these are basically event-based triggers you can set. So for example, every time I land, I want to play a sound. So let's say I want to play sound, and I want this sound to be, let's see, brush whoosh. All right, this is going to be incredibly obnoxious, but just for demonstration purposes, let's see what happens when I land as Granite. So every time I land, it makes that sound. And events, I mean, you don't have to just do on begin play, on update, on death, on land, or any of these, which are all kind of the default options. There's a whole slew of events you can do. So every time that you short hop, every time you fast fall, every time you move into a ceiling, when you get parried, there is just so much you can do. And obviously sound effects is just scratching the surface. You can do if-then conditionals, you can set booleans, and you can jump to certain animations. So one thing that I want to show is for side B, there's a particular global variable set for Granite. And there's some global variables and there are some local ones. And that will bring us to variables. So under variables, you can see side B ball form is a custom variable that applies here. And actually, if I change to B from side B and I click variables, it's still there because it's a local variable. And the Boolean logic is false by default, meaning that side B ball form is not, it starts out on false, right? And then you can check these boxes that says when you die, make sure that this is set to false, and then returning to idle or being interrupted, it will be set to the default value also. This ensures that when the move side B is over, it'll also reset. So those are really helpful to keep in mind when you're creating these custom variables. Why is this important? Well, because side B ball states basically when Granite becomes a ball in his side B attack, like what you're seeing here, there's a set of Boolean logic that sets the variable to true. And now that we're in ball form, it's going to check to see if you're on the ground. And if you are on the ground, it's going to create some dust particles like this. And it's also going to make this sound. But if you're in the air, those things won't happen because it would look really weird to see dust in the air. That doesn't make much sense. But over here, we can see that there's a get up animation and there's a few other animations too. And this will trigger when you hit the wall or you hit the ground. And that's all determined in these actions up here. So if I go back to events you'll see some animation events for side B that are specific to side B. On land, what will happen? Well, if the Boolean side B ball form is true, you're going to move at a certain horizontal velocity, it's going to play a certain sound, and play a certain effect. And it's going to play frame 70 of this, meaning when you use side B and then you land, it's going to jump to a different part in the animation, what we saw earlier. So during ball form, let's say he lands onto the ground, it's going to jump all the way over to here. So we're going to see that in practice. So if I use side B on the ground, it's going to create some dust effects and make those sounds. But if I use it in the air and land, I'm going to bounce like that. So that's how you can use variables. Now notice I didn't bounce that time because my move was already finished by the time I landed. Oh my goodness, I moved so high in the air. So there's how it works. And obviously you can get pretty granular with that and you can do some pretty cool complex stuff. But those variables are not required to make a character. And there are two last things I want to touch on. One is back to kind of the user interface. If you'd like, you can move these timelines around and name them to whatever you like. So for example, you can move the animation rig up here. If you want to call this something specific, you can call it, you can call it whatever you'd like. If I want to create a new timeline, I just have to click this plus icon. Let's say I want to make another actions timeline. And this one's just going to be dedicated for comments. It's not going to have any of the actions or anything like that. It's just going to be for comments. I can right click and select new empty keyframe. I can click new action and select comment. Say something like, this is a reminder that Granite has red eyes. In case I forgot about that, because my edit of Granite has red eyes. That's not a very helpful comment, but you get the idea. You can use this for certain things. And what I might do is I might change this to say comments. So now I know this is for actions, for, creating the dust effects on the character or playing certain sound effects or what have you, right? And this is simply for comments, and that kind of makes it easier to organize my workflow and know what's what here. One more thing to note too is for projectiles, for a lot of the stuff you'll have existing stuff like projectiles already exists, this character rig already exists. But if you don't have that, you can use these buttons to insert it. So for example, let's say I wanted for some reason the side strong to throw this projectile. If I click this button, it's going to insert it right here. So that would throw the projectile. If for some reason I have no animation rig, let's delete the animation rig. I can just insert it by doing this drop-down menu and clicking this, and that's going to insert the animation rig with the pose from the rig. Well, I want to undo that because I don't actually want to delete the old rig that I had, but you get the idea. So now I'm going to select the projectile here. And as you can see, when you press B, this boulder rotates. And it's a sprite layer right now, but you can put anything in here that you'd like. So just for fun, I'm going to replace the boulder with something else. Let's open a sprite sheet. Let's use our trusty Cora sprite sheet, and let's say we want to throw Cora's head. That's what we want to do, not a boulder. And what you're going to see is it's not quite going to work because this is a sprite layer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually create a new layer for sprites. I'm going to call it Cora. All right, and I'm going to hide this layer for now, and I'm going to copy this sprite, paste it here. I'm actually just going to delete the old boulder one. So now Cora's head is going to be what's thrown instead of the boulder. And so we're going to return a character. We're going to test that out to see if that works. Okay, so I'm going to press B. And look at that. We got Cora's head instead of the boulder. And that works pretty great. We're going to save all our hard work again here, and I'm going to show you how to finalize your character. So once you're ready to go, you're going to go over to the portrait button, and you're going to be able to pick a custom image. Now, I don't have anything on hand, and this will look really bad, but the idea is you can use 64 by 64 pixels, and it will generate a portrait icon to select on the character selection screen. So I'm going to click accept. That's fine. And it's going to generate that for the character. Now, the most important step is to click finalize for verses. And this is going to take a little bit longer than your saves. And the reason why is it's actually baking in all of the animations that you created into sprites. So what this is going to do is it's going to let us play our character in the main VS mode. So if I go back and I select VS, I can select Granite Demo, which is the character we just made with this not so great profile picture. Let's turn on a CPU. Let's battle real Granite. And let's pick this stage. Okay, so here's our character in battle. And Granite is so terrified of this monstrosity that he just bailed. Oh my word. I jumped so high. But yeah, here's our character in all of its glory. And all the custom variables we set, like making that obnoxious sound when I land and bouncing on the ground when I'm in ball form, all work. There's the wall version of it. And yeah, your character is already fully playable. So there you have it. There's an overview of the character editor in Smack Studio. There is so much you can do with this, and we cannot wait to see what you create. Thanks, and I'll see you guys on the next video.